Climate change is the biggest challenge of our times, and we have no option but to live up to it. Welcome to Addressing Recurrent Shocks and Climate Adaptation, Building Resilience and Responsive Programs. My name is Ines Arevalo, and I am co-author of the State of Economic Inclusion report and consultant at the Partnership for Economic Inclusion. I am delighted to be moderating this session. And before we move on to the great country presentations that we have today, I'd like to go through some housekeeping first. As you see on the screen, this session will be presented in English, Spanish, French, and Arabic languages. Please look in the chat for instructions on how to connect to the appropriate language channel through the globe icon that you've got at the bottom of the screen. If you're having difficulties joining the session through the audio or connecting to the right appropriate language channel, please contact us through the chat box and our IT team will assist you. Please also use the chat box. We want to hear from you throughout the session. So as we go through the presentations, and if you come up with questions, please type them in the chat box and we'll be raising them through the Q&A at the end of the session. We want to be hearing from you beyond the Q&A, so we'll be launching polling questions throughout the session using menti.com. This is an application that you may have already become familiar with in the previous sessions. So when a polling question comes up, just go on to www.menti.com and enter the code 77489034. You also have it on the screen. Today, we'll be exploring the role of economic inclusion programs in building climate resilience and adaptation through the experiences of two country productive social safety net programs in Niger and Ethiopia, as well as from the BOMA project, which I will further introduce later. If I could have the presentation on, please. So resilience, that's great, thanks. Resilience is a widely used concept, but a bit of an elusive one as well. So I'd like to hear from you. Please start sharing Menti 1. When you think of the concept of resilience, what words come to mind? So please go on to Menti, www.menti.com, use the code provided 77489034, and start typing up the words that come to mind when you think of the concept of resilience. Excellent. We see adaptation, long-term, sustainability. Please keep them coming. We only have 3 responses, so just go on to menti.com and use the code provided and start sharing your thoughts. We hear resilience all the time, and it's come up in a lot of it's one of the key objectives of economic inclusion programs. Many programs outside of the economic inclusion space have it as a core element of their programming. But what does it mean? Excellent. Adaptation stands out over other words such as natural disasters, well-being. Excellent. Before passing the floor on to our speakers today, I'd like to spend a few minutes framing the discussion. Thank you. You can close Menti 1. Thanks. Next slide, please. As I was saying, there are plenty definitions of resilience, but it is often understood as the ability of a system to continue to function over time in the wake of a shock. I'm not going to go through the slide in a lot of detail, but I just wanted to highlight that the way this is understood is as a set of interconnected abilities that span across the before, during, and after a shock continuum. And it includes the ability to anticipate, to cope, to adapt, and for some also the ability to transform, which is understood as an additional ability or one that cuts across and further enhances the other three abilities. Next slide, please. So what do we know about how economic inclusion programs help build resilience to shocks? If we look at the evidence provided in the State of Economic Inclusion report, we see that by virtue of how economic inclusion programs are designed, looking both at the objectives and also at the summary of evidence on overall impact, the fact that economic inclusion programs seek to address multiple constraints means that we see a strong focus on income diversification, increasing income, assets, savings, which are all key indicators of resilience, as we saw in the earlier slide. Next slide, please. But so far, I've talked about resilience to shocks in general. But what is important to consider when we talk about resilience to climate-related shocks? We see that climate extremes and disasters are becoming more frequent, more severe, and affecting the poor more disproportionately. Resilience and vulnerability go hand in hand. If poor people lack the resources such as income, assets, or even access to key information, they will resort to negative coping strategies both in the short term and in the long term, including overexploiting the natural resources on which their livelihoods depend, which can further deepen existing environment and poverty traps, and therefore undermining future resilience. So in this context, it becomes extremely important to understand those sources of vulnerability. And this involves going beyond the household, and as it's shown on the graph on the right-hand side, it involves looking at the factors and the actors that interact within the socio-ecological system that we live in. I hope that by the end of this session, you'll get key insights into how economic inclusion programs can be designed and implemented more intentionally to achieve climate-related resilience and adaptation. And as it was highlighted in the first session this morning, to strengthen how we can strengthen those links between economic inclusion and environmental sustainability. So I'd like to move on to our first speaker today, Mr. Idrissa Samna. He's the Social Safety Net Coordinator and Principal Advisor to the Prime Minister in Niger. He will give a 12-minute presentation on Niger's Productive Social Safety Net Program. Mr. Samna, over to you. Thank you.
Merci Ines. Je m'en vais vous présenter donc les filets socioproductifs pour l'inclusion économique et la résilience au Niger. J'espère que vous m'entendez bien. Donc, en termes de contexte, je vous dirais que le Niger, en tout cas, malgré qu'il ait accompli un certain nombre de progrès ces dernières années en matière de réduction de la pauvreté, il compte quand même 40 voire 42% de la population rurale qui vit avec la pauvreté. Le Niger fait face aussi à des crises consécutives, notamment en tout cas sur un certain nombre de frontières au niveau du Mali, du Burkina Faso, du Nigeria, du Tchad et même de la Libye. Donc on a des foyers d'insécurité, ce qui amène le déplacement des populations, des réfugiés. Actuellement, on compte plusieurs centaines de milliers de réfugiés qui vivent au Niger et des déplacés qui se déplacent à cause de l'insécurité. Le Niger fait face aussi à des chocs climatiques récurrents, donc vraiment qui affectent un peu la performance économique du Niger. Ces chocs-là ont pour nom sécheresse, inondation, ainsi de suite. Diapositive. Vous pouvez activer la prochaine diapositive. Merci. Toujours par rapport au contexte, donc le Niger a quand même des données concernant les filets sociaux. Ce que on a implémenté les filets sociaux, voilà, merci, pour renforcer la capacité du système à répondre aux chocs, pour aussi réduire la pauvreté et l'insécurité alimentaire et promouvoir la résilience des ménages. Ces filets sociaux implémentés ont un lien avec la résilience au choc. C'est aussi pour stimuler donc la relance économique. C'est aussi pour renforcer le capital humain. C'est pour améliorer les perspectives d'emploi pour les couches défavorisées et aussi pour favoriser l'autonomisation des femmes. Diapositive. La prochaine diapo. Donc, en tout cas, comme élément dans le cadre de merci. Dans le cadre donc des filets sociaux, nous avons plusieurs éléments pour ces filets sociaux. Il s'agit principalement des transferts monétaires en réponse au choc. Il s'agit de transferts monétaires contre le travail et des transferts monétaires pluriannuels accompagnés de mesures d'accompagnement, notamment pour l'inclusion économique et pour le volet de changement comportemental. Prochaine diapo. Les transferts monétaires donc en réponse au choc, c'est en fait, ils se fondent sur un mécanisme, n'est-ce pas, de déclenchement qui sont prédéfinis, qui permet d'étendre, n'est-ce pas, les transferts monétaires qui sont faits aux ménages vulnérables. Et c'est généralement pour la réponse au choc, ça touche la sécheresse, les inondations, les épidémies et dans les zones de conflit. Ces transferts monétaires, c'est des transferts de 15 000 francs, environ 27 $, donc sur une durée de 12 mois. Et ils sont faits après un ciblage géographique sur la base donc de déclencheurs précoces. Et aussi, mais ici, il n'y a pas de mesures d'accompagnement qui sont faites. Et nous avons tout dernièrement aussi fait expérimenter un transfert monétaire en réponse à la pandémie de la COVID-19, où on s'est adressé à près de 400 000 ménages au Niger, dont 250 000 ménages en milieu rural et 150 000 ménages au niveau du milieu urbain. Diapositive. Le transfert monétaire contre travail, en fait, donc, c'est des transferts monétaires qui sont conçus pour soutenir les populations pauvres, leur permettre en communauté d'entreprendre des micro-projets axés sur l'adaptation au changement climatique. C'est aussi une démarche participative qui permet d'associer la communauté à la conception, la gestion et le maintien donc des micro-projets qui sont exécutés en cash for work donc pour les populations. Puis enfin, maintenant, les transferts monétaires pluriannuels. Donc ça, c'est des transferts monétaires qui sont faits aux ménages pauvres pour les soutenir par rapport à l'insécurité alimentaire, augmenter leurs revenus et favoriser des investissements. Ces transferts monétaires sont couplés avec des mesures d'accompagnement pour un changement de comportement et des mesures d'accompagnement productif. Et ces transferts monétaires sont faits sur 24 mois, donc sur 2 ans aux ménages qui ont été sélectionnés. Et ces ménages sont sélectionnés sur la base vraiment de l'approche PMT, donc, et classés selon une certaine priorité donc, de la consommation alimentaire du ménage. Maintenant, voyons voir par rapport aux mesures d'accompagnement qui sont couplées donc au transfert monétaire sur 24 mois. C'est au cours de des transferts monétaires de 24 mois qu'il est fait maintenant les mesures d'accompagnement pour permettre vraiment d'améliorer donc la résilience de ces populations. Et ces mesures d'accompagnement ont pour objectif d'augmenter aussi la productivité et le revenu donc des activités économiques des bénéficiaires des filets sociaux. Et nous avons diapositive. Nous avons donc par rapport à la prochaine diapo, par rapport donc à ces mesures d'accompagnement productif, nous avons 7 niveaux de mesures d'accompagnement productif. Prochaine diapo encore. On a 7 mesures, comme j'ai dit, pour l'accompagnement productif. La formation des groupes et coaching, c'est-à-dire c'est de la formation de bénéficiaires regroupés à environ 20 membres. Donc, ils sont coachés et ils bénéficient de conseils. Et cette activité se déroule sur les 24 mois que durent donc les transferts monétaires aux ménages. Nous avons la sensibilisation communautaire et les aspirations aux normes. Il s'agit ici de faire une projection de vidéo montrant un couple, un ménage qui, malgré les chocs, les changements climatiques et autres, a pu donc être résilient, enfin s'en sortir, à trouver en tout cas des manières pour s'en sortir, pour éviter d'entamer ces moyens d'existence, tout ça là. Donc, c'est des projections qui sont faites, suivies maintenant de causeries, de discussions avec maintenant le groupe de gens qui ont suivi cette projection. C'est la facilitation aussi, comme troisième élément, c'est la facilitation des groupes d'épargne et de crédit communautaires. Donc, c'est les associations avec associations villageoises d'épargne et de crédit qui sont mises en place. Donc, c'est des groupes de 9, en tout cas de moins importants, qui permet effectivement à des femmes de se regrouper sous, avec la possibilité de faire des petites tontines. Donc, sur le montant qu'ils reçoivent, ils arrivent à économiser un petit montant qu'elles mettent ensemble et qu'on fait bénéficier à un certain nombre et qui permet de conduire des activités et même d'accéder à un système de financement décentralisé pour contracter des crédits. Nous avons l'autre activité, la quatrième, donc c'est les ateliers de compétences vie. En fait, c'est des formations qui sont données donc aux bénéficiaires pour la confiance en soi, pour des relations entre les genres, pour développer des compétences en communication et tout cela. Puis maintenant, la cinquième, c'est la formation en micro-entrepreneuriat. Donc, c'est vraiment la formation pour mieux gérer son entreprise, des formations qui sont données donc vraiment pour des activités agricoles et non agricoles. Et en sixième position, c'est des subventions, en plus donc des transferts monétaires de 15 000 sur 24 mois. C'est une subvention qui est donnée en une seule fois de 80 000 pour permettre aux ménages, n'est-ce pas, surtout les femmes, de conduire l'activité économique pour lesquelles elles ont été appuyées pour faire leur plan d'affaires, pour monter leur plan d'affaires. Et enfin, comme activité, c'est l'appui pour l'accès au marché. Donc, c'est la facilitation pour des achats collectifs d'intrants. C'est les coachs qui sont membres de la communauté qui aident un certain nombre donc, de bénéficiaires à pouvoir faire des achats groupés. Prochaine diapositive. Donc, il y a eu une évaluation de cet accompagnement productif. Je m'en vais vous donner les principales conclusions de cette évaluation. Prochaine diapo. C'est qu'il est possible, donc on a relevé qu'il est possible de mettre en œuvre un programme intégré de mesures d'inclusion économique dans le cadre donc des filets sociaux adaptatifs. Et nous avons effectivement essayé de mettre à l'échelle le système filets sociaux à travers ces mesures d'accompagnement productif. On a observé aussi des impacts forts donc, de l'accompagnement productif, ce que ça a pu stimuler les investissements, ça a pu permettre de diversifier les activités économiques, ça a pu permettre d'augmenter les revenus des ménages, et nous avons aussi des niveaux élevés de consommation alimentaire au niveau des ménages bénéficiaires comparativement à des ménages témoins. On a aussi constaté que les bénéficiaires ont amélioré leur bien-être psychologique et social à travers ces mesures d'accompagnement. Toujours comme enseignement, en tout cas tiré par rapport aux mesures d'accompagnement, la diapositive suivante, c'est que les mesures d'accompagnement ont permis d'augmenter la consommation, en tout cas sur 6 mois. Oui, sur 6 mois.
Samna, excuse me. I really hate having to cut you off, especially because I think the results of the Niger productive safety net are phenomenal. But we are running out of time, and I want to make sure that we have time for all the presentations and for some lively discussion at the end of the session. I'm terribly sorry. Let me say.
Je termine tout de suite.
Okay.
Je termine. Donc, je disais que la consommation alimentaire a augmenté. Sur les 6 mois après l'intervention, on a pu constater qu'ils ont augmenté leur consommation de 13%. Mais 18 mois après, c'est 15% que les ménages-là ont pu augmenter leur consommation. Et la rentabilité, c'est que 18 mois après, vraiment, les coûts de cet accompagnement productif ont pu être retrouvés. Donc voilà, mesdames, messieurs, en conclusion, vraiment, les mesures productives contribuent à l'efficacité du système de protection sociale adaptative et les mesures là amènent à la réduction de la pauvreté, l'amélioration donc de l'emploi et l'autonomisation des femmes. Je vous remercie. Merci.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samna. Indeed, the results of the Niger example are phenomenal. We have shared in the chat box links to additional resources, especially including the results of the impact evaluation that was published recently. And what I liked about the Nigeria's example is that it's a clear example of how economic inclusion programs that build on a social safety net can further enhance the productive investments that safety nets have found to have, and that help households prepare and adapt to shocks, while I at the same time leveraging the foundational intervention that is the safety net to be shock responsive and to help households cope with shocks. So thank you very much, Mr. Samna. Before we move on to our next speaker, I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to understand with the next Menti question. Please start sharing Menti 2. What aspects does your program or those that your organization supports have in place to build household resilience? Transfer for consumption support or consumption smoothing, business capital, financial services facilitation, or coaching or training for awareness raising around these elements, or none of the above. So please go into menti.com and use the code provided on the screen. So far, one answer. So please just go into Menti and let us know what aspects of your program or those that your organization supports are in place to build household resilience. Excellent. So while we wait for some more responses, just to highlight that these are some of the core elements, some of the core components that we see are part of economic inclusion programs and that are supportive of household resilience. And that's great. Thanks. So exactly, a lot of the programs have these components. Excellent. Great. So now I'd like to stop sharing this question and moving on to our next speaker. We have a last minute change, and we have to present the Ethiopia's Productive Safety Net Program, Ian Campbell. Ian Campbell is a World Bank consultant that has been supporting this program since its early design stages. He'll be presenting this program, as I said, on behalf of the government, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. Ian, you've got 12 minutes, so over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Building resilience to climate-related shocks. The case of Ethiopia's Productive Safety Net Program.
Ian, your voice is cutting out. Maybe you can disconnect your camera to see if that helps with the bandwidth. Thank you.
Next slide. Are you controlling this slides or am I?
Jack, can you please move on to the next slide?
Can you move to the next slide?
Thanks.
Controlling the slides. Productive Safety Net Program. Can we move to the vulnerability slide? Can we move to the next slide? Okay. Ethiopia, a population of 117 million, one of the world's poorest countries. Nonetheless, over the last 10 years or so, Ethiopia has achieved substantial progress. You will remember Ethiopian famines of late remain high. The majority of the population is dependent on rain-fed agriculture. Sorry, can we go back? Can we go back to the last slide? Hello? Hello? Can we go back to the last slide? Right, Ines, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So which slide would you like to show right now?
Can you go back to, okay, I'll jump to the current slide.
Which one, sorry? I think there is a slight delay in the sound.
We have a very favorable policy context. Oh. Slide number 2 I was on. Okay, we have a very favorable policy climate in Ethiopia. comprehensive social protection policy complemented by 4 covering food and nutrition since 2005. It has 5
I think we've lost you, Ian. I think while we try to, yes, I think Ian's sound has gone. So I'm going to suggest to move on to our discussant, and let's play around with the order here. So we
seem to have lost the slides.
Yeah, we lost
Could
you.
we
Ian.
return to the slides?
Okay, we hear you again.
Yeah, just for a couple of seconds.
Let's give it a try, and if not, may I suggest, Ian, that you disconnect and connect again? But let's just give it one more try. So, Jack, can you please? Excellent. We'll be okay. So please tell us the slide that you want us to be at right now, Ian.
Yes.
Which
I'm
slide?
waiting for the slide to come up here.
Which slide? Okay, so Ian, while we try to sort out your connectivity, because we are losing you, and so I think it's
number.
Ian, can you hear me?
Slide number 5.
Okay, let's just give it a try. Now I can hear you.
We seem to have a problem with the slides, yeah?
Yeah, no, it's just the sound. So let's just give it one more try, and if not, Ian, I'll ask you to reconnect while we have Sam from the BOMA project. So let's just give it one more try. Jack, can you please move on to slide 5, please?
This is slide 5.
Okay. Thanks. Ian, please come in. Thank you.
Yeah, the only problem I'm having is with the slide.
You cannot see the slides? Okay, sorry. Let's move on. I think we're losing precious times, and then we'll try to get Ian to reconnect. So please stop sharing. Thank you. I'd like to bring in our speaker, our discussant from the BOMA project, which is an NGO operating in Kenya and other parts of Africa. We have Sam Owilly with us. We are very pleased to have you, Sam. Sam has a wealth of experience in the intersection between economic inclusion and graduation programs, climate change, and natural resource management. He's also been working with the government of Kenya to advance this agenda. Sam, you've got 10 minutes to share with us some key considerations and entry points that economic inclusion programs can use to connect economic inclusion and environmental sustainability. Over to you, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ines, and pleased to address you this evening, this morning, this afternoon. I'll be sharing on BOMA's experience working at the interface between economic inclusion and climate adaptation, resilience, and shock preparedness. So BOMA borrows heavily from the standard poverty graduation approaches, some of which has been shared by my panelists and the case from Niger. What is unique about BOMA's poverty graduation approach is that it is specifically intentionally designed for the drylands of Africa, taking into account the unique challenges that affect these locations. When I say unique challenges, we all may agree that the arid and semi-arid lands in Africa suffer the greatest impacts of climate change. Such impacts which include, most notably, drought, occasional flash floods, rainfall variability, and other secondary impacts, for example, market price volatility, epidemics, both for livestock and also human beings, and also infrastructural damages. So BOMA, in realization of these challenges, moved in to intentionally develop a customized or tailored economic inclusion graduation model, what we call the Rural Entrepreneur Access Project, to address the critical needs of the communities and inhabitants in these locations. This model was developed through a series of tests that were focused on the critical areas that supported the livelihoods in these regions. These include addressing the aspects of food security, addressing nutritional areas, health, access to health services, human capital investment, as well as savings, incomes, and asset accumulation. At the center of the BOMA's model is really a very robust targeting approach, an approach which is meant to really identify and bring on board the most vulnerable, who are also the extreme poor, to be able to get this support and build their agency and abilities to be able to cope, adapt, and transform within the phases of climate shocks. So through the process that BOMA implements, which is the standard 24-month cycle, even though most recently we've gone to shorter versions based on learnings that we have encountered over the last 13 years, we run them through the sequenced interventions, taking a period of about 24 months. And specifically, we've been targeting women in these locations because we also do appreciate that women are disproportionately affected by the climate change impacts. Most recently, we've also focused on the youth demography because we know bringing in youth at the center of this intervention is going to really create a critical mass of champions who are going to support the wider community in addressing these impacts moving forward, both on adaptation as well as mitigation. And so, what really have we seen and what have we witnessed? As shared by the case from Niger, the entry points are more or less the same. We need, for example, to address the poverty situation, which is the underlying driver of vulnerabilities of these communities. But at the same time, we also need investment on the human capital. We need to really make sure, and we are making sure, that children of school-going age are able to access education. Youth who are able to undergo technical or vocational training have those opportunities to access those skills to, one, reduce interdependency, but more importantly, education supports us to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. So through the graduation model, we are also able to address issues of food consumption and food security, assist the household to build their assets, generate income to support the immediate needs, and more importantly, also accumulate savings that will be able to support them run through a shock season. So through the success of these adaptive interventions, we also did realize that because the livelihoods in these regions are fundamentally nature-based, the households rely mostly on livestock, and even the local market systems are anchored on livestock as well as other natural resources that are around. We decided to intentionally move in to integrate environmental management, environmental conservation, natural resource management, and climate change information awareness into our economic inclusion program, the graduation approach, and could bring in other critical players such as the county governments to collectively co-create a solution that would help us utilize the natural resources in a sustainable way to meet the immediate needs, but at the same time also protect the same resources to be able to serve future generations. To this extent, we've developed a coalition of critical players that is led by the county government of Samburu and built in a mechanism to support building capacity and training of the households, the women that BOMA works with under the Economic Inclusion Program to increase the urgency and put them at the center of driving change around equitable use of natural resources to support their households, but at the same time also participate in community actions to protect the same natural resources. To this extent, we have actually seen women now transitioning to more nature-friendly enterprise opportunities, so they're able to benefit from those natural resources, forest products, but at the same time also take up initiatives to conserve the same. At the county government level, through the technical working group that brings on board the county government and other non-governmental players and actors, the synergies between these players has enabled a more systematic process in putting in the champions and having a more streamlined process in addressing the specific needs for the Samburu County. So we've seen women enrolling in committees and actually taking leadership positions within these committees to drive this agenda. And so the big learning is that there is really a critical role for the most vulnerable to drive the resilience activities, even as they work their way out of extreme poverty. And the case that we have seen in Samburu, for example, is classical because it has given us an opportunity to reach out to the most affected and transform them to be the champions for protection as well as sustainability. The lessons of which we are now taking over beyond the borders, scaling up to other counties, and also taking them over beyond the borders, for example, to Uganda, where we are working with Swiss Caritas to put in place this integrated approach so that even as we address the poverty requirements, the underlying driver of vulnerability, then we also address the other social aspects and needs for the society. And so we believe that economic inclusion programming, looking at the entry points around life skills training, proper and accurate targeting, food security interventions, health and nutrition, savings and cash transfers, savings, income accumulation, and asset building are critical in building resilient and responsive programs. To this effect, there is a need to intentionally design resilient programs that even as we address poverty, we make sure that we embed resilience framework within that poverty program design to be able to achieve this outcome from an intentional or purposeful approach. More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, that I also want to mention, and one thing that has been very critical at the center of our success is putting and having in place a proper performance monitoring process. That we really move into this through a design, but put in place proper performance monitoring with specific key performance indicators that we are able to progressively track to, one, help us achieve the outcomes, monitor our progress towards achieving the same outcomes, and also support our adaptive management to correct as we move along through that process. For BOMA, for example, we have deployed a technology platform that we call Performance Insight that is able to give us real-time monitoring of these activities. So in a nutshell, BOMA alone cannot be able to achieve these outcomes. And that is really why we purposefully went to bring on board other players who are doing things that are the same or closer to what we are trying to address, and more importantly, put government at the forefront to be able to drive this process. And so through local policies, system level changes, we can actually achieve resilient programming, resilient and responsive programming to achieve climate change resilience through economic inclusion. I beg to stop there, Ines, and would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam, for a very enlightening intervention. I think you highlighted very key aspects, like on one hand, leveraging some of the platforms, some of the activities that economic inclusion programs have to start introducing awareness raising, access to information, etc. Another point that I think is very worth highlighting is that a key element of working with the multiple stakeholders, particularly the government, in advancing systems change. So thank you very much for that. I believe Ian's connection has improved and, well, is now good. So let's just give it one more try to just run through some of the key messages in Ethiopia's Productive Safety Net Program PowerPoint. So Jack, if you could put that on and then have Ian to summarize some key aspects, because what I think is really important about Ethiopia's presentation is that it builds on the Niger's example, as in it not only addresses household resilience through this set of interventions core to economic inclusion programs, but it adds on a community element that I think is very important for participants to learn about today. So if we could have Ethiopia's presentation on, please. And if Ian, if your connection doesn't work, may I ask Abu to jump in? Thank you. I'll just give you 5 minutes. And in the meantime, while we get ready, to all participants, please start sharing your questions if you haven't done so already. And we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. Thank you.
Right, Ines, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, can we go to slide 5? If the connection is poor, then switch over to Abu.
Okay. And we can't hear you, Ian. So Abu, can you please unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly clear. So can you please?
Okay, let me try to jump in and take over from Ian. Apologies
Perfect.
for the glitches. I mean, the internet is here very weak. Okay.
Perhaps just quickly introduce yourself, Abu, and then move on to the presentation for 5 minutes.
I am Abu Yadata. I am a senior social protection specialist based in the Ethiopia country office. I am co-TTL for the Productive Safety Net program, and I've been managing this program since its birth in 2005. So this is briefly who I am. In terms of context for social protection, Ethiopia has a national social protection policy and also strategy, as well as action plan, and the disaster risk management policy is also another area that supports the implementation of safety nets in Ethiopia. Now we are in the 5th phase of the Productive Safety Net program, which started in 2005. This 5th phase, which runs from 2021 up to 2025, has the following key components: safety net operations, public work component, a complementary livelihood component, which is very important and relevant to this session, support for mothers and young children, and of course, consolidation of humanitarian food assistance and the PSNP. In Ethiopia, there are 2 types of rural safety nets. the PSNP, which is a development-oriented, and the humanitarian food assistance, which is managed by a different sector ministry. So now, under PSNP 5, we are trying to consolidate these two rural safety net operations under one body, under one umbrella, so that they use the same system to scale up when there are shocks and scale down when the shocks are gone. By strengthening the livelihoods component, all project components build climate resilience. The public work is a good example. Climate adaptation is provided mainly at community level by the public work component and a household level by the livelihood component. Next slide, please. Please tell me when I'm not heard. The public work component restores the productivity of the natural resource base, breaking down spiral such as less water infiltration, falling crop yields, clearing land for agricultural activities, and then increasing population. These are the underlying causes for food insecurity in Ethiopia. As you can see from the picture, this is a very degraded land, the landscape, and the public work, contributes in maintaining and conserving, rehabilitating these types of landscapes, and also contributing to agricultural productivity. Next, please. In Ethiopia, there are two agroecological areas, the highlands and the lowlands. The lowlands are inhabited by pastoral communities mainly. We have a watershed and rangeland rehabilitation guidelines, and the public works follow these guidelines for implementation. It's a landscape approach, meaning holistic, integrated, need-based planning by the community. Each community's public work plan is broken down into small, labor-intensive public work sub-projects, the building blocks to achieve a productive watershed or rangeland unit. The sub-projects are interdependent and carefully planned to follow hydrological and social infrastructure requirements. Working to scale, meaning we have every year implement about 46,000 sub-projects, public work sub-projects, ranging from soil and water conservation activities within area closure, averaging around 304,000 hectares per annum, to health spots and community roads. At any one time,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Abu. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to summarize key aspects, because I want to give the chance to ask a few questions to the panel. So if you could just wrap up the key elements. Thank you.
Please go to the next slide. This is an example of how the public work contributes to building the resilience of communities engaging in the project. Please, next slide. The project is focusing on making the public work even more climate smart. The PSNP has been described as one of the world's largest climate change programs. 72% of PSNP for financing reaped climate core benefits. Next, please. Another important component of the PSNP is the linking with early warning system. In the current phase of the program is focusing in strengthening the early warning system of the government, so that the system generates timely data to inform whenever shocks happen, so that responses are put in place in time. Next,
excellent,
please.
I think we're gonna have to leave it there, so
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. But I mean, we fell victim to technology.
Exactly. That's what happens in virtual events, but at least we can all connect today. So I'd like to to pose some of the questions that have come for the speakers, and I'd like to pose it for all of you. And so Sam mentioned that it's important to advance this work. It's critical. How critical? So the question is, excuse me, how critical is it to engage various stakeholders alongside government in climate resilience work? And how does work at this level connect to influencing policy articulation at the county or national level? So if you could all come to comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ines. It is not only critical, but it is a requirement to have government championing climate resilience, because climate resilience requires a landscape or a holistic approach, part of which also requires enforcement of some of the policies that are put in place to address the challenges. Number two, bringing in all stakeholders enables people to learn to co-create solutions and also test and learn from best practices that have been implemented. Best practices which then informs the adoption of those practices to bring the change that is desired. So it is very, very critical to take a multi-stakeholder approach, co-create the solutions, have the target of vulnerable populations at the center of it, and allow them to drive the process. Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps a question that has come up for the Ethiopia team, and I think perhaps the Niger team can also comment on how is the project being influenced or improved through early warning systems or trigger mechanisms that are put in place to create a better response. So please, Abu or Mr. Samna, if you could comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, had I gone through the slides, this question wouldn't have been raised anyway. I'll try to briefly respond to that. The country has a conventional kind of early warning system, which relies on biannual crop assessment to identify the needs that might be created due to shock. In Ethiopia, the major shock is drought, followed by flood. So once the needs are identified, from the districts up to the federal level, resources are raised. The early warning system that so far has been used is, it's not saving lives. Sorry, it doesn't save livelihoods, but it saves lives because it comes late and too little. So to avoid that, currently we are working in modernizing the early warning system to provide and generate timely data so that resources can, be mobilized on time to respond to any eventual kind of shock. So we are in the process, and we hope that in the near future, the country will have a robust early warning system that will use modern technology to respond to shocks and also raise resources for a timely response to the needs. So instead of being reaction, it will be proactive for the response. Over.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Definitely the importance of timely information for timely responses. Thank you very much, Abu. So I'm afraid I need to be closing this session. And this is such an important topic, a very key challenge. And we've got at the moment more questions than answers on this topic. But just to let you know that on day 3, that is on Thursday, there will be a follow-up session on the role of economic inclusion programs in building a more green, resilient and inclusive economy. So please stay tuned. And as you will have seen, there is an evaluation that we would like you to respond to get a sense of how you enjoyed this session. And apologies for the technological glitches. Thank you very much. And remember, Will you live up to the challenge? Thank you. Bye-bye.